Welcome to Corks and Conversation with Mariko Tamaki.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to her. Cathi, I'm a fan of YA, and
Yes.
so I love to get to read a good YA book for work. And she also writes comics and graphic novels, which is unique among our guests. So I'm excited.
Oh, I am too. This is gonna be a fascinating conversation. She has such a really interesting and broad background. But first, let me tell everybody about her. Mariko is a Canadian writer of comics and prose, as you say, Christy. She writes comic books for Boom Studios. And I want to say boom because it's boom with an exclamation. So it makes me happy to say
Okay,
it.
that's perfect. Yeah, okay.
I've been practicing all afternoon. She has written for Marvel and DC Comics. She is the co-creator of the New York Times bestseller This One Summer with Jillian Tamaki, a cousin, I believe, just saying,
hmm
which received Eisner and Governor General Awards, as well as Caldecott and Prins Honors. And they were the Prins Honor winner. She's also written Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up with Me, and with Rosemary Valero O'Connell. And Mariko lives in Oakland, California currently. Her latest book, which I'm going to hold up because I love the cover, is called Cold.
I like the back too. See, look.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect. It is a haunting YA, as Christy said, young adult novel about a shocking crime in a quiet town with four students who knew too much and said too little. So, Mariko, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to
Yay.
talk to you.
Yeah. So, before we get started, we like to mention the wine. And so today we're doing a double thing
I do
because,
have double too.
yes, we have red wine and seltzer
Yes.
because,
Here's the seltzer. Ooh,
yes,
that's a
for
cool bottle.
sure. And because in the book, and the red wine kind of fits, because it's young adult and they're stealing their mom's wine,
Yep.
so that's happening. And then the seltzer is what they should have been drinking and what they were drinking the next day after drinking mom's stolen wine. So we're
Oh
going to
my
do
God.
it.
Okay, so let's have a toast to the brand new release of Cold. Cheers to you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
As we are recording this, Mariko's book just came out yesterday. We're recording this on the 9th. So congratulations on your book birthday.
Thank you. I know. I
Yes.
love the creation of the book birthday. It used to be the sort of book launch.
Mhm.
Now I feel like it's easier to just say it's a book birthday.
Yeah.
You could have like
Yeah.
a nice dinner. That's all
Yes.
good.
Yep. Absolutely.
I love it. It seems like less pressure when you say book birthday versus launch. It seems like that's a lot more work.
Well,
Yep.
and I think that it also, speaks to the sort of labor of making a book. I think that
It's
it
like giving
means,
birth.
well, I mean, I've never given birth, so I don't know. But I do think that, for so many people, because writing is such an invisible thing, and you work for years on these things and then
Mhm.
they sort of come out. And I think it's just kind of like an ode to the sort of the effort that goes into writing your
Yeah.
book,
Yes.
that you get to call it a book birthday as opposed to like just your book is out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Because
I
there's
love that.
labor involved that people don't often realize.
Yeah.
And you had
It's
to
a lot
birth
of you
it.
sitting alone. It's lonely
Yeah.
labor. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
had to birth it. Okay, so let's get into Cold. I'm going to hold up this cover because I just think this is so great.
I know,
It is
right?
a young
It's
adult, but I can
Sarah
attest
Maxwell, I think, is the artist.
it's
She's so
beautiful.
amazing.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
beautiful. And I love, like you say, so you'll notice two different people on the front and the back. And this is a young adult, but as Christy and I have discussed many times, young adult novels are enjoyed many, many, many times by adults, by adult readers. And
Mhm.
we are two of them that can attest. This is a great read. And my kids are out of high school now, so they don't really listen to me when I give them book suggestions at this point. But this totally would have been on my list, one that we both would have enjoyed and be able to talk about. And I would highly recommend that for anyone.
Yeah, I did read a little. My
You
daughter's
did say that, yeah.
23. Yeah, I think that's
Don't
yeah.
have to whisper that.
Anyway, but I read like the first couple chapters this weekend because we were out somewhere and we had some time, and so I have her hooked. I didn't let her read the rest of it because I had to bring it back and read it myself. But she's got it. She's going to read it right before
great.
she gets out of town. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing I say to people about young adult books is that they are about young adults. Is kind of the mainstay of YA. Is it's about the experience of being a young adult. And I think that that really just covers such a spectrum of experiences. I think that there are young adult books that feel closer to middle grade to me, and there are young adult books that feel closer to adult fiction. And I think that that spectrum makes sense when you think about, like, there are young adult lives that are, you know, sort of delve into things that are more or less mature depending on where you're at as like as a person.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, I think I've had people tell me that the book seems a little violent for young adult readers. And I just think that that's the spectrum of young adult readers is just so vast. I think that there's just a different young adult book for every reader.
I
Right.
think so too. And I think also people's impression of what is too violent or too something for young adult readers, it's a little risky to say that because our young adults are having lives that we as adults don't always know the
Right.
depth of those lives. So, okay, so let's get into what Cold is about. I'll let everybody know it is a young adult thriller, I would say. It's about a death of a young adult teen, Todd Mayer, who's now he's lurking like a ghost kind of around.
Which is a really cool premise. I
really
have to
cool
say.
premise. He's kind of hovering right around over his body and he's walking.
But it's not ghoulish, you know.
No.
That's the
There's
difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a detective who's investigating his death. Todd's, you know, he's replaying the events, but then there's also this character, our narrator, Georgia. And I love this. She didn't know Todd. They had some similarities. There was some other things, but she is who we're seeing this through. And it is just a page turner. Christy told me she read it in one sitting. And
other than that first two chapters with my daughter.
Yeah. So I'm there's so much we have to unpack with you, but I'm so curious how this story came to you, just the premise, like you said, with this young man and his death and his being around and this Georgia. So how did this all come to you?
Well, there was a couple things. One, I am an avid reader of murder mysteries. I love murder mysteries. And I think I had avoided them because I thought they would be really hard to write. So I thought, like, well, nobody wants, it's like, you know, when you see in Great British Bake Off where they're like, who would try to make that? And it's like, let's just try. Let's sort of do this. So I had the idea of doing a murder mystery. And then separately, I had been trying, I was, actually, my girlfriend pointed out recently, my girlfriend Heather Gold, who's also a writer and artist, was like, you're sort of revisiting all of these kind of books from your childhood. And one book that has particularly haunted me is Lord of the Flies, William Golding's Lord of the Flies, because I was always obsessed with the character of Piggy, with this boy who sort of is like a little more insightful, is like a little louder than he maybe should safely be. And you're sort of like part of what you're learning is basically foreshadowing, right? Like you're kind of watching this kid walk towards, you know, the ending of his story. No spoilers if you did not read Lord of the Flies in grade 9. But I was always obsessed with that character and with this just idea of what that character is supposed to stand for, right? Like that the character sort of stands for a lack of empathy or for like the kind of other side of the savage nature. And I just thought at the same time, he's not the narrator of his story, right? Like we're sort of just, he's kind of the sort of like subplot of what's happening to the main character, Ralph. So I've always wanted to do something with that character and to do something with just that feeling of peril and what it feels like to feel like that you are in a dangerous situation and that you are not safe and like how different people adapt to that. So I had the story of Todd and it was becoming more of a murder mystery. And then I felt like there was just something about that being the only story that felt very grim to me because it is a grim story, right? There's not a lot of hope in the story of Piggy and there's not a lot of hope in the story of a boy who dies.
Mm-hmm.
especially in like the first pages of the book. And so I just thought I wanted somebody else to sort of be the other note in the book that is not necessarily like the counterbalance, like she's not the opposite of Todd, but she is making slightly different decisions and taking a slightly different take on similar situations and what it means
Mm-hmm.
to be the outsider who is kind of in this what feels like a precarious situation.
Right.
And I just thought in terms of kind of going between those two things, it felt less like this like death walk to the end of the
No,
book.
that's truthful. When you think about
Mhm.
it, and you're like going, I don't want to know this poor guy died in the beginning, but then the way you handled it, and then you focus on this other living character, so we have that hope, even though we're delving into the life of the person that's passed away. So I thought that was you did it good.
Thank you. Well, it was really like it took forever to write. Probably was the longest book that I've ever taken to write because um yeah, it was just A, it was hard to write a murder mystery, and B, I just felt like I really owed the story a different kind of ending than what was the obvious ending. I
Hmm.
just felt like I didn't want it to be just this kind of like that this is the victim in the book and this is the not victim in the book. I wanted there to feel like they were both part of the story in a way that felt more balanced, but that just took forever.
Right.
When you say forever,
It's
how long
hard.
does forever mean for you? Because you're
I
very
mean,
productive.
well, I mean, I'm also always writing other things, so that affects it. Um, Not that I would want to say that to my editor, who is incredibly patient. Um, but I think I thought I was going to turn around this book in like a year, and I think it took something closer to 3 years.
Wow.
Mhm.
Um, just because I stopped and started. Like I wrote a story that
Mhm.
was just Todd. I wrote a story that was just like I literally wrote 4 of these books before it was the book that it is now.
It's
Do you
so
think you
interesting,
needed to
though.
write Georgia and write Todd before you could figure out how to bring them
Yeah, I wrote Georgia and I
together?
wrote Todd, and I think it made me, I do think a lot of writing and a lot of what we talk about, especially for YA, is empathy. And
Mm.
I think that I took writing a couple drafts, I think I really gained more empathy for these characters as I was writing these different drafts. And and then once I had a lot of empathy, I realized like, part of it is like there's like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this whole thing. So you're going to have to stay to the, if you have a character, something happened to a character on Wednesday, then the next thing has to happen to somebody on Thursday, or you have to be really clear that it's still Wednesday.
Right.
So a lot of it was just fiddling with that and trying not to make it look like you don't want to see all the seams of like, I'm trying to make it clear that this is Wednesday because I need it to be Wednesday.
Right. Which you didn't. I
That
mean,
was lovely.
you did or
Thanks.
you didn't. I don't know how do I say
Yeah.
that? Anyway.
I
The
smoothed
good
out my
one. It
seams.
was the
Thank
good
you.
You
one.
did it right. Yeah. Yeah, it was seamless. Yep. And anyway, so also
I'm blinded. I'm gonna shut this just a minute. You
Yeah, I
okay.
was just gonna say, like, the sun is gonna creep in on me at some point too.
It's already dark here.
Sorry,
I
we've had no
mean,
sun for like the whole day. So
plus it's rainy, yeah. Um
okay.
I really liked, and you explore so many different topics that are really important for teens and are on the forefront
Adults.
in the news.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, like bullying, LGBTQ plus, bystander syndrome kind of was a term that I was kind of learning, but I was like, yep, that's there. And their characters are so real, and you wove them really well. And now I know why, because you did it separately. But don't you think, I mean, isn't it important to have in every genre, like mystery versus, I don't know what they call contemporary, to have all these topics and diversity shown to kids, but also adults, because some of us, read young adult, like we said. So it helps, and they understand each other and their differences. And can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I do think that it comes down to like a diversity of characters and the different things that impact different characters' lives. Like really seeing, like, not to be academic about it, but really seeing the intersectionality of these characters and, that it's about race, it's about class, it's about sexuality, it's about gender. Like, I think that it's one thing to introduce a topic, but it's another thing to say, to try to explore more all the sort of facets of a person's life. Like, I think one of the things about a lot of YA is that nobody goes to school, right? Like, especially on television, you have these kids who are teenagers and you're like, they never go to school though.
Right.
Like, so they never have to go into a classroom and sit in the classroom and even read the things that you read in a classroom. Like, for
Mhm.
me, a huge part of the things that I experienced, in terms of the different aggressions and outsiderness that I felt,
Mhm.
had to do with sitting at a desk in a room and not just like what I was, with who I was with, but what I was being taught, right? So I think like all of those things, all those layers are a part of, and then that's when things kind of come up, organically, really. I mean,
Hmm.
LGBTQ issues come up in my writing because almost all my characters are queer because I am queer. And so, but I think that the other part of that is, like I'm a queer person, I'm an Asian person. I also grew up with quite a bit of privilege in terms of, in terms of class. Like, I went to an all girls private school. So like there's all these things at play. And that's why, part of me when I was starting to work on this book was like, oh yeah, also part of what's happening at this kid's school is there's kids who have SUVs and there's kids who don't have SUVs.
Mm.
Like,
Hmm.
it's just also a part of, all of the all the sort of various push and pulls of privilege and power that are happening in those spaces.
Hmm.
Um, so
And
yeah,
I
I
think a
think
lot of okay,
no, go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna just say I feel like a lot of times, as adult authors, when we're writing about that age group, sometimes I think we try to gloss it over. And I think that's the worst thing to do because you want to kind of, but it might be painful for the writer or something. So it's really refreshing to see that, you're just diving right in, because the issues that come up are not new. There are
Sure.
issues that were, when I was young and things like that. But
Mm.
now, I feel like my kids are much more attuned to diversity in all types,
Yeah, I mean,
because,
those characters have always been there, just the discussion around them is changing,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Like, so I do think that that is, like, I think the kids are just way ahead of even, my generation
Mhm.
when it
Hmm.
comes to their ability to discuss things. I had a conversation with a 12-year-old boy once about a character in This One Summer who has a miscarriage. And he was like, that must have been like, that just seems so sad and scary. And I was like, "What the hell is going on?"
Wow.
I
I was
know. Like,
like
how does he even understand this?
I was like, "It is sad and scary, and that's insane, or
Yeah,
that's very interesting that you can say that to me."
I mean,
So I
right.
12,
Yeah, I know. Honestly, I was just like, I had to go outside and have like a little lie down
a little
after that because
minute,
that was
like,
so
oh.
intense. But I do think that the discussions of things, like when I grew up, nobody even talked about queerness. There was
No,
no,
I was just gonna
like,
No.
say, my
yeah, it wasn't coming
kids,
up.
I have kids that are 19 and 20, so they aren't that far away from me still going with them to buy books, like, and we would discuss together just because we all like books. I cannot recall even 5 or 6 or 7 years ago a book about a queer kid, a gay kid. I can't even recall having that readily available to them. I'm sure there were a few, but I mean, now I think there are so many more um, characters of, like you say, all kinds of things being shown up, and that's such a great but sad, like
Well, it's a
sad that like we're like,
conversation.
whoa.
Yeah, the conversation is expanding beyond
Hmm.
the communities that they were originally a part of. I mean,
Yeah.
Hmm.
I knew when I was in my 20s, oh, the queer books, but I don't think that most of the people that I knew who were straight, certainly my parents weren't like, yeah, Alison Bechdel's amazing, like it
Yeah.
wasn't coming up.
Yeah.
But now that is a part of something larger than just, I think that there's an awareness that those stories are interesting and are relevant to people beyond
Hmm.
just the immediate community. I mean, we still
Right.
as a community need them and want them, but I
Yeah.
even think it's, and we're having more discussion, like, in terms of having like white queer characters versus understanding like that BIPOC queer characters
Hmm.
are are also like that. When we're talking about diversity, it's not just about having like one
Right.
version of a thing, that it's about
Right.
multiple versions.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that has been the trend in the past was, oh, token. But I really like how there's like real in-depth characters of all different types, because I think that is the way that we get everybody to get along, kind of.
Well, it's the
I hope.
start. Sure. Yeah.
I hope. I mean,
think
it
that-
seems like it. Yeah.
I mean, the stories are changing. I mean, it was definitely a choice that I thought a lot about, to have a character who is, I think the thing that I wanted is for all the queer characters in the book to be out, but that for that experience to be very different. Like both Georgia and Todd are, people at their school know that they are gay or they're queer, but the actual ramifications of that are very different for both characters. Sorry, I have to cough.
Right.
So
yeah, it has to go beyond representation. Like I think initially representation was just like, let's just get to representation, like a broad scheme of but now the actual lives beyond just representation, the label is lovely to see.
yeah.
Yep.
I think it's an ever evolving conversation, like even in terms of what representation means and what it means to have like, what stories out there and what stories are, I am aware as a queer author that one of the characters, there is a trope of a gay character dying and the sort of tragic gay character. So I definitely was concerned about that writing this book. And I think the interesting thing is to have more conversations about what those depictions mean, as opposed to just saying like this depiction is bad and this depiction is good.
Right.
So how do you handle that? So when you are thinking about writing it initially and how you're going to talk to somebody and your agent or your editor, how do you think, okay, I know this is a trope, but how do you express, or how do you even work through breaking through that?
I think you're responsible for everything that you write. So you're always making a choice to write the story that you're, and make the depictions that you're going to make. I try to talk to other people. And I have, I think every writer has like a trusted circle of people that they can talk to about the things they're concerned about with their books, including, your editor. Mine was Connie Sue, and she's an incredibly talented editor at Roaring Brook. And I think it's a back and forth. Shout out Connie Sue. I do think that it is a back and forth. I told them that I wanted to write this murder mystery. And then I think my approach when I got nervous about it was I tried to just be as like honest as I could about what I was trying to do. That the goal was always like a detailed depiction that was emotional and that was, trying to be as honest as possible, whatever that means for every writer, and sort of sticking with that. Like, I think that, it's funny, it's like, I feel like being a writer now is like a proliferation of opinions.
Right.
Like, I think that, it used to be that when you wrote a book and then you would get like one review or like 3 reviews. And your mom would be like, I don't really get it, but it's so great that you wrote this thing. It's so cool. My mom's been actually very good, so I shouldn't say that. But I think
she sounds supportive.
My mom, I listen, as I say in the acknowledgments, my parents paying my rent is the reason that I could be a writer for as long.
I love that. Actually.
For years, my parents paid my rent, and that's how I was able to do what I do now. But yeah, I think that you really have to decide, whatever you write has to come from you, and you have to find a way that you can stay true to that, because it's really like it is another force, an external force that is the like other people's thoughts about what you do.
Right.
That is present and is sometimes really relevant and is sometimes really overwhelming, and you have to figuring out what to do with that is a huge part of being a writer today.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of avenues and ins and outs.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to take a little refreshing drink.
Oh yeah, sure.
And it's time for, I want to talk about your seltzer situation that you have going on. That looked very cool.
My seltzer sister, that they bring the seltzer to your house.
Oh my gosh.
It comes in a spray bottle.
Out.
So you make the that amazing, like, yeah, it's great. I love it. Yeah, I can't take
Okay.
credit for it, but my
I'm
partner
very-
came up with ordering this for her house, but it's amazing.
either I'm very easily impressed, or I don't know.
No,
Like,
that's really
that sounds
cool. That
It's
is
a great
cool.
sound.
exciting to me.
It's like 50% the sound that it
Mhm.
makes.
And you get to do the thing, the motion. I like the motion.
Yeah, but I've
Yeah.
also drenched multiple tables doing this. Whatever you're like, look at this, and then you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I'll get you another
Oops.
plate. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
It's a lot of that.
Okay, sorry.
If you don't like
sidetrack.
somebody, you can accidentally spray them.
Oh.
Yeah, I feel like there could be.
Oh yeah, you want some water?
Yeah.
This is the time, sorry, sidetrack, that
Oh,
we
yeah.
ask our guest authors the question in the bottle. We ask you a random
Ooh.
question that we might get to at the bottom of a bottle.
Oh, I love it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, this is a fun one. Would you rather be invisible or have X-ray vision?
Oh man.
I think you asked the right person that question.
I know. I'm thinking she probably has a lot of, with her comic background, has a lot of different superpowers. But
I mean, okay. I don't really think I want to be invisible because I feel like I'm an introvert anyway, and I can just go to my room if I want to be alone.
okay,
You already
like,
got
I
that's a good way.
I don't want to be a voyeur. I don't want to see things that people can't see me seeing. That makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I'm constantly losing my AirPods and my keys. And I feel like having X-ray vision, like even being able to like stand outside my house and look at my house,
Oh, and be like,
just get the like grid view. I feel like that would be
There
really
they are.
useful.
Oh, that's a good answer.
yeah, that is a good
'Cause-
answer. I had never
Yeah.
thought about the actual logistical benefit of having X-ray vision before.
I know, because everybody
Yeah.
always thinks you're just taking somebody's clothes off,
Right.
and that would be voyeur,
Yeah,
and
see, I
you don't
didn't
want to
think
do
that
that.
either. Ew.
I would be wearing glasses most
What
of the
did
time
you
so that
think?
I wouldn't see that I would have X-ray vision. I would mostly not want to see things.
I definitely want to be invisible. I mean, that's the childhood spy in me. I'd want to be
Oh,
able
yeah.
to
Yes.
sneak around with nobody knowing, and
Well, I'm a good eavesdropper anyway, and frankly, people are so unaware. I think because people have cell phones and AirPods now, I think people's awareness of their personal space has just gone out the window.
yeah,
So I
agree.
have sat next to people having really loud, detailed conversations that you're like, I'm right here.
I
Like,
know.
I don't know who Judith is, but like, I know everything now. So
I
Or
know.
my worst fear is the person next to us does know who Judith is, and the
well,
person,
that's
you know,
the thing. Yeah.
You live in a small town.
I do.
I mean,
I'm
I
thinking
used to
in the
ride bus.
airport. That was great.
Yeah.
Oh, the bus. That's
Bus
another one.
airport is just the perfect setting for it because train is no good because it's too loud, the ambient noise. But
Mhm.
bus, just sitting next to someone on the bus while they're talking about someone they don't like, and I just look at the person now like I'm totally listening to what's
I know.
happening. I'm not
Bear into
even
him.
pretending. I can pretend to play Scrabble on my phone, but why bother? You don't
Yeah.
even know.
I'm just gonna watch you play out your life.
Yeah, good to know. Yeah.
This is what I'm going to write about in my next novel,
Well, and it's
or
funny 'cause-
comic, or
Yeah, like you just hear these amazing turns of phrase. My partner and I'll be sitting, and just hear these incredible things that people will say. We're just both like, wow, that's really good.
I know. Quickly
Yeah.
write it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that.
All right.
I have to say, Harry Potter's invisibility cloak is just too attractive to me. I
Yeah. That's
too am an
true.
introvert, and I would love to like go to the grocery store and be like, whoosh.
Oh, I just put my headphones in and I don't really care.
yeah.
You
I
know,
live in a
like I
small
feel
town.
like if I'm
She
listening
lives
to,
in a small town and she's well known.
maybe that's
so,
the thing. Maybe
yeah.
that's
Maybe.
like what it means to be like always living in a city that I feel like nobody really knows who I am anyway.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's interesting because we used to live in Minneapolis, and we were from a small town. We moved to Minneapolis and moved back, and I didn't realize how much anonymity I had in the cities until I moved back, and then I was gone, and it was lovely because I loved seeing everybody I knew, but I also really felt that loss of anonymity. So hence invisibility cloak.
Yeah. I will say the one time is whenever you go to any library association or any kind of con.
Yeah.
And if you've been on a panel and then you're in the elevator on your way up to your room afterwards and someone's like, I just saw you on a panel, and you're like, oh, that's great. Oh, I just really
Yeah.
don't want to talk
Yeah.
anymore. So you're just
Invisibility.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. You're like, I'm so sorry. I'm just super honest. I'm like, I really just don't want to talk anymore. Like, I
You're
appreciate
like,
it, and that's
and
super
I'm
great,
done
but
talking now.
yeah,
So
I
I
know.
can't.
we're gonna be
It's
quiet.
over. Yeah. If you caught
That's
me
why I
an hour
love
ago,
like, on our cell phones where we have the
do not disturb.
caller ID. I'm just like, it's the end of the day if it's not an emergency, but
It's me
whatever.
that she blocks. I'm just saying, it's always
No,
me.
never.
Well, most
Never.
calls now aren't even for you, so it doesn't really matter.
That's true. Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
you are a very diverse writer and creator, as we've been mentioning. You've got graphic novels and comics. And I just find graphic novels so interesting. And I mean, I'm not an artist, I'm the writer's aspect. And I wonder how much you do of the art versus the art of writing and the collaboration. I mean, how do you do that? Because I read a few pages of one of your graphic novels, the
Was
one
it
that
purple or pink?
no,
Was
it
it color?
wasn't. It was the one that had the Caldecott.
Oh, that's well, it's like, I don't know what the color's actually called. That's this one, Summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, it's
Just
called
like
a color
Caldecott.
too?
Was it
Okay,
like Caldecott?
No, I just like, because the book I did with Rosemary Laura Dean is pink and gray.
Oh,
and
the cover.
The cover,
Okay.
like
I
the
was
actual
like, I thought you were
illustrations.
saying the title, and I'm like,
No,
I didn't
no.
even see any of
When people
these.
can't
I don't know
remember the
who I
title, I'm
was
like,
researching.
Yeah, I'm like, what color was it? Yeah.
Yes. And so, but they had, and so I was like, because I'd never really read a graphic novel, and it was just so fascinating. The pictures were so in depth, and it was kind of cool how some of the pictures told the story, and then you had some words that would go along with it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did they do this? How did you collaborate that? Because that's like, did one of you say, okay, I'm going to do this story and you do this picture on this, or do you do some of the pictures?
I don't draw at all.
Kathy's
Yeah,
laughing
I
at
am
me.
not an artist. So I had the privilege of working with really amazing artists. And really a huge part of writing for any kind of comic graphic novel project is that you are not doing the lion's share of the work. Like, really, the script is the smallest part of, like, in terms of time, especially, of that kind of project. And the other thing is, there's really no one way to write them. I mean, I stumbled into comics, and the first one I ever did with my cousin Jillian was a book called Skim. And I didn't really know how to write a comic. I had never seen a comic script before, but I had worked in theater. So I just wrote it as like a theater script, which is kind of works because it's acts and scenes. It's like sort of like, I didn't detail the page or the illustration. I just sort of told the story because it was a diary. So I had the sort of diary captions. I had a basic, description of what was happening during the story. And then I had what are called captions, which is like um, any kind
Like
of storytelling.
scenes
Well, no,
thing.
captions are basically, there's dialogue, which is what the characters say, and the captions are sort of like any kind of text on a page that is a character's thought or is sort of like a sort of line of storytelling that isn't actually being spoken by a person on the page.
Okay.
So I just did, yeah, I treated it like a play. And then my cousin basically sort of took what I wrote and made a graphic novel, is what I would say. But that's not always the way it works. I think it really depends on who you're working with. I've worked with artists who are sort of much more like, especially working in graphic novels, so the people that I've worked with on graphic novels, it's much more, it is a co-creation. Like, it is, you start the story and you're sort of like laying out the characters and you're laying out sort of the details, some of the details of what the story is, and then the actual sort of like manifestation of the story, kind of similar to what you would think of for theater or for television or movies. Like, the actual manifestation of it is the artist, except in this case the artist is the actors and the director and the
Oh,
DP and all those things.
that makes it really clear, much more clear to me, because I was like, how in the world?
Right. But it depends, because when I write for DC Comics, like when I write Batman books for DC Comics, That is a much more, I think, because the timeline is so much shorter and because the turnover is much quicker, which is the same thing, you have to sort of consolidate things much more. So when I write for like a Batman comic, I write what's called like panels, which is you write the page and you do like panel descriptions. You say how many panels are going to be on the page, what's happening in those panels, and then you also do the dialogue and the captions. So
Okay.
it's much more detailed and regimented, which is not to say there's not like interpretation and sort of changes that the artist makes as you're still like co-storyteller, but
Mhm.
it's just a little more regimented.
Right. Right.
So
Because that's what
you're
I was thinking until I looked at those pages, and I'm like going, okay, this is not like a comic. This is different.
Yeah.
so which comes first? I mean, does it depend on who you're working with? Like do you get drawings sometimes first and then they ask you to add, or
For graphic novels, it's generally that the script comes first.
Okay.
Usually what happens is I will pitch a story to a publisher, or I will pitch a story, in some cases like working with Jillian because we are related and because we sort of work much more closely than myself and the average other creator. Usually it's me talking to my creator or talking to the publisher about what I think the story is going to be and seeing if that's the thing that, my co-creator artist wants to spend the next 3 years of their life working on.
Small investment.
Yeah, it's huge. And then kind of coming up with, for me, working with Jillian, there's usually a much more of a back and forth in terms of the outline and in terms of like sort of shaping the story. And a lot of that sort of shaping continues when like Jillian especially is actually working on the book. Because like the actual manifesting of it usually requires like making changes and the story has to make sense to the illustrator. But in the case of, for example, Laura Dean, I worked with an editor, Callista Brill, at First Second, and she and I did a lot of that shaping. And I actually gave a script to Rosemary Valera O'Connell, which she then obviously, like people, like the amount of storytelling in the sort of visual work of comics is so huge. Like, I think that there is this kind of, and I think that generally there's been a lack of conversation about the collaborative nature of art. I think people like to think of creators or like to think of the writer as being like the sort of like who's the most important or like who is telling the story. But really most stories and most mediums, except for say novels, are created by like, multiple people.
Yeah, because
Wow.
that's what jumped out at me, because I was like, okay, that picture said it all. I didn't need any, but somehow that person knew to do that picture with this story because the next one would, have some lines or something.
Yeah.
It was
I
really
think
neat.
my goal for working on comics is to create a space to tell a story with somebody else. Like you really have to be very open to the idea that you are one of the storytellers, not the storyteller. And that is, I think, because I grew up in theater, especially, and because I grew up in, performance art and doing things with other people, that has always felt really comfortable to me.
I wonder if writing is more solitary, obviously, when you're writing a novel, as you say. So I'm curious. I mean, I think that's really interesting that you can do both. This leads me into a question that I was on your website, and it's really cool, by the way. It's really cool, and I latched onto a podcast that you had done. You said this about making art. You said art is a process where you let loose ideas, but it's also a process of editing and revising. And I was wondering if you could share, because those are such broad, different processes, I would think, processes. And I was wondering if you could share your thoughts about that, the editing, revising versus creating.
Well, I think it's like when you first start as a writer in your creative writing class or whatever you get to do when you're a teenager, I feel like the first, like, you just feel like you write the story and it's done, right? You're like, oh, I wrote the story, it's finished.
Yeah.
And then you get graded on it. Like maybe you get a teacher who's like, this doesn't make any sense. And I didn't know who this person was, but it's done as soon as you finish writing it. And I think it is a really, like, it is like another sort of mental process to allow someone to come in and say, this is the beginning. Now you have to do something else, and then this will be finished. Like,
Mm.
it's such a, like, whenever I talk to students, whenever you're like editing their work, like, it can be a very fraught process to tell like a 15-year-old, like, well, you're just gonna, you could just rewrite the opening, and they're like,
Wait.
yeah,
Do you know how much time I spent on this?
Yeah. Well, and especially, like, they write it, especially because when I started, you write it in pen. It's not like you're gonna rewrite the whole thing in pen. You're just like, it's done.
I'm sorry, were you asking me to do what? Do I get
Yeah.
extra credit for that?
Right. And I think that it is, like, I think that is the difference between being a person who writes things and being a writer. A writer edits.
Mm.
Like, it is a
Mhm.
process of taking this idea that you have, which is great. And the most amazing part of an idea is when you first have it, you're like, this is going to be genius. And then you start writing it and you're like, this is hard.
It sucks.
And like getting through, like, writing is more than an idea, right?
Yeah.
Writing is the actual, like, molding and shaping of an idea. It's clarifying an idea. It's getting rid of things that don't work. It's like bringing in things that you don't necessarily like and making them work. Like, it's so many other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, like, it's a process that you have to sort of dread and love, right? Like, you have to be able to, you have to be willing to have that happen. And I think the best editors that I know, and that I've had a chance to work with, have been people who, like, really work with you in terms of the kind of conversation about it. Like, really take your idea and all the things that are working and are not working and expand it into, like, this world that you're excited to talk about and that you want to do your best job of manifesting.
Right.
So, like,
That's cool.
that's the
Wow.
sort of, and especially working as an editor now, like, that's always what I strive to do, is not just come in and say, like, like, I
This
didn't get this.
stinks.
Like, I didn't understand this. Because that's the thing, like, whenever you're in a writing group, like, the worst writing groups are just people being like, I didn't get it.
Yeah, like,
Yeah,
what?
this what
Good
doesn't
for
make
you.
sense to me. And I'm like, okay, well.
You're like, oh man, I hate you and I hate you.
I'm leaving.
None of you understand my brilliance.
You're not worthy. You're not worthy.
Exactly. But it's like, and that's the thing, like, I think, and that's the thing too, especially for the times that I've been able to work with teenagers and work with younger writers, is to say, like, if someone says to you that they don't understand something and you're just like, well, I understand it. It's like, well, you're not the only person reading this. Someone else has to be able to follow this. So even if you think it's brilliant, and you have to have a sense of what your story is and what you want to hold on to. I've certainly had arguments with editors where they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, we're leaving it in. I like it. Or like, I don't like this joke. Like, I have so many song references that editors have said to me, like, kids aren't going to get. And I'm like, I don't care. I want them to be listening to Duran Duran. Like, that's happening.
Yeah.
Duran.
So you pick your mountain and you stand on the top of it.
Yeah, like, this is it. I'll cut anything else, but not Duran Duran references. Sorry.
Stays. But I think that is, like, that part of it is, and it's like the ego thing too, right? Like, you're like, it feels obliterating to have someone say that they don't get something, and it feels obliterating and exhausting to think that you're going to have to explain it. But that is a part of writing.
Refreshing to remind us all.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, Christy has a final question for you, Marie.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Sorry,
This is
really
one that
swallowing
we ask all our authors. It's like, to appease our foodies out there, mysterious foodies. Which of your characters would you like to share a meal with, and what would it be?
Ooh.
Any of the characters in any of your books, what would you like to share a meal with, and what would it be?
That's interesting. I feel like I feel like the mom in this one summer, I feel like I really relate to that mom. And I think in part because so much of that character was Jillian sort of bringing her own ideas to that. Or, she brings her own ideas to a lot of it, but there's just a couple, like, sort of salient features I think she put her like in a bikini kill t-shirt at one point. I was like, yes, I feel like I get this character so much more. And my main meal that I always want to share with people is either brunch, because that's my favorite meal of the day, or dim sum, which is like a version of brunch. So if anybody is ever like, that's why with COVID, I'm desperate for outdoor dim sum, because that's really all I ever want to eat is dim sum.
Oh,
So
well, we'll
good.
join you for that once you can get out to California, because, oh my, I love it too.
Yeah, that is the great thing about California is outdoor eating is my friend. We've been able to eat
down
outdoors
here
this whole time.
too. We, so if everybody comes here too, but
Yeah.
not South Dakota right now.
Yeah, no outdoor eating. Well, we do, but it's not pleasant. Okay, so if any of our listeners want to reach out to you or get some information about you, where's the best place to find you?
The best place to find me is Instagram. That is where I spend most of my time. So where I'm at Mariko Tamaki on Instagram. I am on Twitter, but I'm on a Twitter diet right now. So I try to only go on when I have something very specific I have to do, and then I kind of cut out.
Like promote this
lovely book
and share this podcast. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel like the issue that I have sometimes with people DMing on Twitter or Instagram is that if it's like a really official question, I don't really like that as like a way to.
Right.
So I also have a website, and there is a place where you can send me an email through that website. I have the worst track record of responding to those emails. So yes,
We're
The
just
best
being
way-
honest
So
here.
Instagram, the best way.
Yeah, Instagram, honestly, that is the best way.
Well, awesome.
Well,
It's been so
Mariko,
fun.
it has been, I'm so glad you joined us. We had a
Thank
great
you so
time.
much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, great.
Lots
And
of
we
fun.
just have to do another cheers at the
I
end.
know.
Yeah,
Oh.
cheers. Hold on, I'm gonna get another
Cheers.
spritz.
I know. Do
Yeah,
another
oh yeah,
squirt.
get your fresh spritz. Look at that.
Woo!
I mean, oh, look at
Cheers.
shout out to Cole.